In tonight's headlines, Chief Executive John Lee says it is necessary to create land continuously to ensure that the government is in control and dismisses concerns earlier raised by former leader Leung Chun-ying about risks of oversupply. Chinachem Group beats 4 other tenderers to snatch a Sik Lek Yuen residential plot at a premium lower than estimation. And Shenzhou 19 is set to launch at 4:27 a.m. for China's 4th manned space mission.
Chief Executive John Lee emphasized the importance of keeping land supply under the government's control. Otherwise, it would trap in barriers built by vested interests. The city leader's reaction came after former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying raised concerns on his social media about the risks of an oversupply of land and housing and a sharp fall in property prices, which might lead to negative equity and fiscal challenges for the government. Speaking ahead of the weekly Executive Council meeting, Lee defended his approach, referring to the early 2000s when the SAR suspended land creation, which led to out-of-control property prices and difficulties for residents seeking home ownership. Land production and supply are 2 different matters, and the government's approach must be data-driven and prudent, he said. According to the latest policy address, the supply of developable land from government-led projects will reach about 3,000 hectares in the next decade. Lee said, land creation takes time, and the government can release land to the market when necessary. He added that the government could always reserve lands, just like how it placed the spare funds in the bank instead of spending them all. Evelyn Bai, Cable News.
Chinachem Group has been awarded the tender for a Sik Lek Yuen site in Sha Tin, the first residential plot to close tender after the recent policy address, at a premium of $1.02 billion. The group successfully beat 5 other tenderers, including CK Asset, Sino Land, Wheelock Properties, and Sun Hong K Properties in bagging the lot. The lot has a site area of about 60,800 square feet and a maximum gross floor area of 304,000 square feet. At a per square foot floor price of $3,357, the valuation of the Sik Lek Yuen lot is slightly lower than market estimations and 15% lower than that of a nearby plot in Yun Shen Circuit sold 3 months ago.
Property prices in the city further slid for the 5th straight month in September and continued to hover at the lowest level in 8 years. The private residential property price index fell to 287.9 in September, the lowest since August 2016, down about 1.7% from the previous month. The Rating and Valuation Department said, logging the gauge's 5th monthly drop. So far this year, the index had retreated by 7.5%. The price of all classes fell over 1%, with medium-sized units underperforming the overall market, dropping around 2%. Entry-level homes with floor area less than 430 square feet were down 1.4% compared to previous month. Those of floor area between 430 to 1,075 square feet were down between 1.8 to 2%. On the other hand, both classes of larger-sized flats slid more than 1.5%. Meanwhile, home rents continued to rise for the 7th month. The rental index rose to 197.5 in September, up 0.1% from the previous month, marking the gauge's 7th monthly rise. Year to date, the rental index has already jumped more than 5%, significantly outperforming the home price index. Evelyn Bai, Cable News.
Housing Secretary Winnie Ho called on the owners of subdivided units to be moral and not to compromise hygiene standards and the basic living needs of tenants merely to increase their profits. Taking to the airwaves, the housing chief said that some STUs have toilets right next to the beds without windows and rely solely on exhaust fans for ventilation. This creates a claustrophobic environment that can significantly impact mental health. Such units are not suitable for rental, she noted. However, Ho said that her bureau has already loosened the basic housing unit standards for windows and ventilation. If it's not possible to install a large window, at least a small one should be provided, along with a ventilation fan, so that residents can have a view of the outside world, she explained. For some units that face walls and lack windows, Ho suggested that landlords could consider adjusting the internal layout, expanding the size of each unit, because at least one wall would have a window. Fortunately, most of the SDUs in the city can meet the standards. The housing minister noted that currently, only about 2% of the SDUs are completely enclosed with light wells, and about 90% of the units are equipped with windows. Jeremy Zhu, Cable News.
Over 25,000 families of newborns received a 20,000 baby bonus since the government commenced the cash allowance scheme a year ago, totaling around $520 million. According to a document submitted by the government to the Legislative Council, by the end of September, it received nearly 27,000 eligible applications. To be eligible for the bonus, babies must be born in the city during the 3-year scheme, and one of the parents must be a Hong Kong permanent resident. The government intends to review the incentive program in October next year. Meanwhile, the Housing Authority's Families with Newborns Allocation Priority Scheme received nearly 2,300 applications so far, in which the family's queuing time for public housing was shortened by 1 year.
A mentally ill man has been sentenced to an indefinite hospital order today for the killing of his neighbor 3 years ago. The incident occurred in September 2021 in a Ma On Shan public housing estate. The defendant, Ho Sa-yu, reportedly killed his 84-year-old neighbor with a knife over noise complaints. Forensic examinations revealed that the victim suffered at least 45 stab wounds, resulting in excessive blood loss and death. Last month, Ho denied murder but pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to his mental state. High Court Judge Anna Lai stated that the defendant had killed the elderly man without any provocation. Psychiatric reports indicated that Ho had a history of violence and substance abuse, and he had previously concealed his condition from doctors, classifying him as a very dangerous person. As a result, the court ordered Ho to receive indefinite treatment at Siu Lam Psychiatric Center under the Mental Health Ordinance. Chief Executive John Lee condemned the United States' decision to curb outbound investments in China, including Hong Kong, targeting advanced technology sectors such as semiconductors, quantum technologies, and artificial intelligence.
Once again, it shows that the U.S. politicians, for their own benefits, impose restrictions on free trade.
Lee further highlighted that the U.S. has earned $271.5 billion from the SAR over the past decade. He warned that this decision would not only harm the global supply chain, but also the interests of the U.S. itself. The city leader emphasized that the SAR government will defend its own interests and safeguard the rights of local businesses, while also collaborating with the mainland to protect national interests. The curbs, which the U.S. Treasury Department finalized on Monday and due to take effect on January the 2nd, will ensure U.S. investment is not exploited to advance the development of key technologies by those who may use them to threaten our national security, said Paul Rosen, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Investment Security.
China's fourth manned space mission, Shenzhou-19 spaceship, is scheduled to be launched at 4:27 a.m. Beijing time tomorrow from the Zhouchuan Satellite Launch Center. 3 astronauts for the mission met the press today ahead of their space journey, among which Commander Cai Shuzhe has already had his first space journey during the Shenzhou 14 manned space flight mission, while 2 post-90s astronauts, Song Lingdong and China's only female flight engineer Wang Haoze, will be in space for the first time. The 34-year-old duo will be the youngest Chinese astronauts in space. They will take over command of Tiangong Space Station from the Shenzhou 18 crew currently in orbit. During the 6-month stay, the main objectives are to conduct space science and application experiments, perform extravehicular activities, and install debris protection shelters, aiming to further improve the operating efficiency of the space station. Meanwhile, China aims to put a person on the moon before 2030, and its 4th batch of astronauts are already in training for the lunar missions. Among 10 new astronauts, 2 are payload scientists from Hong Kong and Macau.
目前2名港澳载荷专家已全面融入团队。
China Manned Space Agency said they have exhibited a strong passion for training and maintained optimal physical and mental well-being. The pair also received Mandarin courses, and personalized meal plans were created to accommodate their dietary preferences. Anna Chen, Cable News. According to an exclusive report by Reuters, President Xi Jinping asked U.S. President Joe Biden last year to change the language Washington uses when discussing its position on Taiwanese independence. The news agency quoted 2 U.S. officials familiar with the private conversation between the 2 leaders last November in San Francisco that China wanted the U.S. to say we oppose Taiwan independence, rather than the current version, which is U.S. does not support independence for Taiwan. Xi's aides repeatedly followed up and made the request in the following months. However, Biden's administration declined to tweak the language in its official statements, while reiterating that it has been consistent with the long-standing One China policy. As Israeli tanks thrust deeper into northern Gaza to eliminate regrouping Hamas militants, at least 100,000 civilians are being trapped without medical or food supplies, in a move that could worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israel's parliament passed 2 bills yesterday. The first one is to ban the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, from operating inside the country. With the second one declaring the nearly 8-decade-old agency a terror group, prohibiting ties with the Israeli state and stripping its 13,000 staff of their legal immunities. Israel accused UNRWA workers of involving in terrorist activities with Hamas and other armed groups, and responsible for the October 7th attacks on Israel last year. The new laws will come into effect in 90 days, leading to possible blockade of humanitarian aid. The Commissioner General of UNRWA criticized that the vote violated international laws and set a dangerous precedent, adding that the bans will only deepen the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza who have been going through sheer hell. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu admitted that avoiding a humanitarian crisis is essential, so his country will continue to facilitate aid delivery to civilians in Gaza in a way that does not threaten Israel's security. While nearly 2 million Gazans rely on the agency for aid, UN Chief Antonio Guterres earlier warned the ban on UNRWA would be a catastrophe in what is already an unmitigated disaster. Anna Chen, Cable News.